If you have a copy of the Bible, I invite you to join me in the Old Testament book of Exodus, the second book of the Bible. We've been in this series for a while now. We're going to wrap it up in the next couple months. And in the past few weeks, we've seen a shift in the book of Exodus as the people of God have traveled through the wilderness and they've arrived at Mount Sinai. And the rest of the book of Exodus is really about what happens here on this mountain where they meet God. Moses, of course, goes up onto Mount Sinai. He receives the law, the testimony of the Lord, and they begin being shaped as the people of God. Right? No longer are they identified as slaves in Egypt, but now they're being reshaped as God's people, and they're learning about what that looks like, what that means. And so we're in Exodus chapter 23. If you need a Bible, John is coming around. You can raise your hand. You can borrow one of these Bibles. If you need a Bible, you can feel free to take it home with you if you need one. But here we're in, last week we saw the Ten Commandments when God met the people and he gave them the Ten Commandments, or as we saw, it's also known as the Decalogue, or the 10 words. Hopefully that didn't cause too much drama in your theology about how many commandments are there in the 10 Commandments. But go back and count. It's fun to figure that one out. But here we're in Exodus chapter 23. I'm going to read verses 10 to 12 as we get more information about some specifics about one of the commandments we looked at last week. Exodus chapter 23, verses 10 to 12. Hear the word of the Lord. For 6 years you shall sow your land and gather in its yield. But the 7th year you shall let it rest and lie fallow, that the poor of your people may eat, and what they leave, the beasts of the field may eat. You shall do likewise with your vineyard and with your olive orchard. 6 days you shall work, but on the 7th day you shall rest, that your ox and your donkey may have rest, that the son of your servant woman and the alien may be refreshed. This is the word of God for the people of God. It's no secret that the way we measure time is very scientific. Right? A day is 24 hours, but more than 24 hours, that's just how long it takes for the earth to rotate on its axis. That's what a day is. A month may feel like it's a random amount of time, and so we memorize, that rhyme, 30 days, hath September, so on and so forth. But the month is determined by the lunar cycle, how long it takes the moon to kind of go through its phases of, full moon, going down to half moon, quarter moon, to new moon, and then kind of gradually going back up to full moon. And that takes about 29 and a half days. Not exactly, and so we have some months that are different than others, and that's what a month is. Our year is 365 days, and some change, and so every 4 years we have that leap year of February 29th where we account for that change, But a year is how long it takes the earth to circumvent the sun, right? That's what we're measuring, and that's a year. And these are all phases of time that are established by the laws of nature, right? There's nothing we can do to change this. We can't change how long it takes the earth to rotate on its axis. We can't change how long it takes the lunar cycle to go through the different phases. We can't change how long it takes the earth to go all the way around the sun. They're set. The laws of nature have established them. This is true for the day, this is true for the month, this is true for the year. But what about the week? There seems to be no law in nature that determines how long a week is. And yet we've all accepted that a week is 7 days. Right? But here is something we can actually change. Right? There's nothing stopping us from altering the week, right? Well, in 1929, the Soviet Union did just that. The tyrant leader Joseph Stalin believed that Sundays were a genuine threat to the whir and hum of industrial progress. He saw the weekend, he saw days off as a waste of time that only stood in the way of world domination. And so he replaced the 7-day week, 5 days of working and a 2-day weekend, with a 5-day continuous work week. And each day, the names of the days were removed and they were given colors and symbols, and everyone's jobs were assigned based on colors and symbols. You'd receive your color, you'd receive your symbol, and that was like your assignment. And that was the system that they set up. And what's interesting is that Stalin didn't even expect everyone to work every day without rest. He just kind of wanted a continuous workflow where there was always a group of people working, because machines don't need rest. He wanted those machines just to be going. And so the people even got days off, but they were sporadic. They were scattered. And you might not think that just rotating the days off would make much of a difference, but kind of long story short, it failed epically. Production actually decreased. Families were thrown into kind of disrupted rhythms where they couldn't get established. Even the machines started falling apart because, as it turns out, no, machines cannot run constantly without breaks and be fine. They too need rest. And so after 11 years, they abandoned this failed experiment and reinstated the 7-day week. And they weren't the only ones to try this. In the late 1700s, in the French Revolution, the revolutionaries altered the week. But instead of making the week shorter, they made the week longer. They made it into 10 days. And the idea was they were being very rational about this. They wanted everything to be sort of on this decimal system. So a week was 10 days. A year was 10 months. They did, a minute was 10, it was, 100 seconds, and so on and so forth. It was supposed to be very rational, very, based on the decimal system. So they reinvented what the week looked like, and they too were motivated, some by kind of industrial progress and being productive, but their main reason for this was that they were trying to destroy any semblance of religion from their culture. They wanted to do away with the liturgical calendar. They wanted to do away with Sunday, the Lord's Day. They wanted anything to do with religion. They wanted to take away and replace with their own religion, a religion based on rationality, a religion based on science, a religion based on statehood. And they did this for a few decades, trying to get this to work. But as you might imagine, just from existing today, you might know it didn't stick. It too failed miserably. And the revolutionaries, they thought this was it. They even called year one of the revolution the first year. This is year one when they began this revolution. But it failed just as the Soviets did years after them. And every society that has attempted to change the 7-day week has met the same end. But why? The week isn't determined by a lunar cycle or the sun the earth rotating or moving through the galaxy. So why does the 7-day week stick across cultures, across time, across places and people? Well, as it turns out, there are some governing factors involved. People have studied this, and they've seen how this cycle is how sort of our biology is wired. We are biologically wired for a 7 day cycle. Everything from our heartbeats to our blood pressure to our body temperature to neurotransmitters to the stress releasing the stress managing hormone called cortisol. All of this is governed in a 7-day cycle. 7-day rhythm, 6 days of work, 1 day of rest. And I think this is a big reason why there are so many people in our culture suffering from high stress, suffering from heart disease, frequent illnesses, high blood pressure, sleep deprivation. Because in some ways, we too, as a culture, have tried to alter the 7-day week, the rhythm of work and rest. We too have filled our weekends with work, with projects, with side hustles, with events, to where our schedules are packed and we have not learned how to turn the machines off. We have believed the lie of Pharaoh that your worth is based on what you produce. And as much as our rational minds want to push against sort of the idea of resting sometimes, this is the cycle we were made to live in, because this is the cycle that works best. And there is but one voice in all of the earth that tells us why. For in 6 days the Lord created the heavens and the earth, and on the 7th day he rested and made it holy. Now, I know that this isn't the first time we've discussed the Sabbath in this series on Exodus, but I did warn you Sabbath was a major theme in this book. It'll come up again later, though we won't give probably full sermons on it, but we will continue to talk about the Sabbath as it's brought up in this book. But we first saw the Sabbath several chapters in chapter 16 when the people of God were out of Egypt. They were in the wilderness. They were hungry. They cried out to God because they were hungry, and God provided them manna from heaven. Remember that? And every morning they would go out and they would collect manna, and they could only get enough for that day. If they got any more, it would turn to rot, and so they couldn't get any more. And so 5 days of the week, they would get just enough for that day. But on the 6th day, Moses told them, get double the amount. Because on the 7th day, there won't be any, right? And the extra won't go bad. It'll be good for the next day. So get double on the 6th day, and on the 7th day, rest. It's a holy day. Rest on that day. It is a gift that God has given. And this was their first introduction to the Sabbath. We saw it last week in the 10 Commandments. I think sometimes as Christians we forget that Sabbath is one of the 10 Commandments. It's one of the big ones that shape who we are as the people of God. And we're given a reason why the Sabbath is so important. I mean, God says, because I made the heavens and the earth in 6 days, on the 7th day I rested. In other places in the Old Testament, in the New Testament, in Deuteronomy that talks about the 10 Commandments, it gives another reason. You practice the Sabbath because when you were in Egypt, you didn't get a break. But now you are no longer slaves. You get to be my people, and now you are meant to rest on the Sabbath. We saw this theme emerging. We'll continue to see it emerge. And then here in chapter 23, we get some more information about this practice of the Sabbath. How it's the single most formative thing that sets the people of God apart from the rest of the world. How it makes them into a holy people. And now there are certainly personal benefits to practicing the Sabbath, and we've talked about these in the past. It actually makes you more productive whenever you have a day of rest. It's good for your spirit. It's good for your mind. It's good for your heart. It's good for you physiologically. It's good for you spiritually. The Sabbath is good for you. And we're not going to hash out all those details today because our text this morning, interestingly enough, when it talks about the Sabbath, its primary focus here isn't on the benefits of those who practice the Sabbath, but it's on the benefits of those around those who practice the Sabbath. Because when you practice the Sabbath, other people are blessed. We've got this new information, even more about the Sabbath, that they're not only meant to practice a day of rest, but we get this new information about a Sabbath year. Right? 6 days you shall plant your crops. And remember, this was an agricultural society, so every year they would plant their crops and harvest them and sell them. And this is what their economy was based on, were these crops. We get this instruction that for 6 years they are to do this cycle of planting and harvesting and so forth with all the different crops. But on the 6th year, they are to let the land lie fallow. Don't plant anything. Just let the land produce what it wants to produce. Now, we know now that this is actually a good agricultural practice because the soil needs a break from time to time to replenish its nutrients. And it helps with the longevity of the crops of the land. And this was a really horrible lesson that we had to learn in the history of our country during the era of slavery, when we not only worked human beings in an oppressive and abusive way, but we also worked the land in oppressive and abusive ways, not giving either rest. And as it turns out, this was bad practice. And the fertile soil that they started with, over time turned into sand that would produce nothing. And in our history, we learned this tough lesson that you cannot treat the land this way. You cannot treat people this way. But fortunately for us, the soul of the African American was much harder to break than that of the land that they abused as well. But I digress. We've learned this lesson that humans are not made for this kind of work. The land is not made for this kind of oppression and abuse. Give the land rest. It's beneficial for its longevity. But also here we see that's not even the reason why they're called to do it. They're not called to do it because it's a best practice. They're not called to do it because it's what will help the land last longer. They're called to do it for the benefit of the poor. He says, don't plant anything on your field. Just let it produce what it wants to produce. There are already seeds there left over from last year's crop. Probably other seeds are blowing in from other places. Just let the land produce what it wants to produce, and that crop is for the poor among you, that they may eat and be satisfied. And then after they get what they want, then the wild animals get to come in and have the rest. Right? And this is, I think, wild because normally if you're farming or you're gardening, you're always trying to keep the wild animals out. Right? You don't want them in your garden, eating all your vegetables. You're trying to put fences and hedges to keep these animals out. But on the 7th year, you're actually inviting them in so that they may benefit from the produce of the land, that they may be refreshed as well. And we see the same idea with the weekly Sabbath as we do with the annuals, the year of the Sabbath. The text tells us that the Sabbath wasn't just for them, that they might rest. It was for their domestic animals, right? Their horses and their donkeys, that they can be refreshed. It was for the benefit of their servants, their employees, that they would be refreshed. It was for the benefit of the immigrants among them, that they may be refreshed. Our practice of the Sabbath, our rhythm of work and rest is not just for our benefit. It is designed to be a blessing to the world around us, that they may be refreshed. Now, I know many of us, and I'm guilty of this, we can live for the weekend, right? Weekend warriors, as we're called. And we can live with, you just got to get to the weekend, and I got so many plans I want to do this weekend, right? Projects I want to work on, things I want to do, fun I want to have. You just got to work until that vacation coming up. I got a week of vacation. I just got to make it till then, and then I'll be refreshed. Or I'm working. The decades are going by. I just got to get to retirement. Once I get to retirement, then I'll be able to rest. And we get in this mindset that we just have to make it to this certain point, and then we'll rest. But this is not the way we're designed to exist. This is not the rhythm we are called to work in. What we need, what our souls need, isn't a vacation, although those are good, still take vacations. What our souls need isn't just getting to retirement or getting to the weekend. What our souls need is Sabbath rest, starting and ending with Sabbath. Now, we don't need to get legalistic about this. The Pharisees did that in the days of Jesus. We saw the Pharisees had such... Actually, I think I'm missing a part of my sermon. I edited it this morning. I don't think it updated. So I'm going to go from memory. Before I get to the Pharisees, I think one of the interesting things we find in the Old Testament is when the people of God, after this time, they went to the Promised Land. There was a time of the judges. Eventually became the time of the kings. And over time, and this was kind of a cycle with God's people, they began leaving God's law. Instead of worshiping God and God alone, they adopted idols and gods from other places and cultures. They started worshiping other gods. They started abandoning God's law and doing their own thing. And God was patient with them. He sent prophets to them to warn them. He sent prophets to bring them back, always with the goal of bringing his people back. And time again, they would refuse, and they would push God further away, and keep doing their own thing, and worshiping their own gods, and forsaking the Sabbath, and just removing the law from their culture, the way of life from who they were. And it got to such a point that even God was like, "You are no longer my people. You're indistinguishable from the rest of the world. You're not mine anymore." And he sent them into exile, if you're familiar with the Old Testament stories. And they went into exile in Assyria and in Babylon. But what's interesting is that their sentence, how long they were going to be in exile, was determined by how long they refused to give the land a Sabbath year of rest. They were in exile for 70 years. So if doing math, 70 times 7, they did not give the land rest for 490 years. For almost 500 years, they did not practice the Sabbath, and they did not give their land rest. And so God sent them into exile, saying the land needs to recover from what you have done to it. 490 years. Man, God's patient. And so we see how, in the Old Testament, how they completely abandoned the Sabbath and did away with it. And in the New Testament, on the opposite end of the spectrum, we see the legalism of the Sabbath. The Pharisees, during the days of Jesus, had so many rules about the Sabbath, about what you could do and what you couldn't do, how far you could walk or not walk, if you could carry something or not carry something. And there were so many rules that the Sabbath was no longer a day of rest, but it became a burden for the people. And Jesus rebuked the leaders for making the Sabbath a burden. And the Pharisees did not like the way Jesus treated the Sabbath because Jesus would heal on the Sabbath. He allowed his disciples to pick grain and eat it on the Sabbath. All things that they considered to be work and breaking the Sabbath. All reasons which gave them a motive to plot his death. We don't want to be legalistic like the Pharisees, and we cannot abandon it like the Israelites of old. We must find a way to practice and be faithful to this practice that is so crucial to the formation of God's people. And that does mean some reprioritizing. Earlier, Pastor Jake referenced Isaiah 58, one of my favorite chapters in the Bible. And later in that same text, in verses 13 and 14, we find this. If you turn back your foot from the Sabbath, from doing your pleasure on my holy day, and call the Sabbath a delight and the holy day of the Lord honorable, if you honor it, not going your own ways or seeking your own pleasures or talking idly, then you shall take delight in the Lord. And I will make you ride on the heights of the earth. I will feed you with the heritage of Jacob your father, for the mouth of the Lord has spoken. Delighting in the Sabbath. Delighting in the presence of God. Isn't this such beautiful imagery for what it means to practice Sabbath? Finding holy rest and letting that rest be blessings for others around us. Once you start experiencing this, I think you'll realize, wow, there's actually nothing better than resting in the presence of the Lord, than delighting in Him and His rest. Once you realize this, I'm reminded of the book of Hebrews tells us how Sabbath is a preview of heaven. Heaven is eternal Sabbath. That's what we're getting ready for, people. We are getting ready for eternal Sabbath. We got to start practicing now. We can't wait to Sabbath until we die, and that's a common phrase. Well, I'll rest when I'm dead, right? We're meant to be practicing this now so that when we get to heaven, we're not like, I don't know how to do this. What am I supposed to do with my time? You're supposed to Sabbath. We got to start practicing now so that when we get to heaven, we know what we're doing. We're well versed in what it means to Sabbath and delight in the presence of God. So I encourage you, find a way to practice this. And you don't need to be legalistic about it. It doesn't have to be on a certain day, on a Saturday or Sunday, or however you want to think about what the word Sabbath means. But a day that works for you and your family, where you'll have to reprioritize things. You'll have to set things aside. That project you want to get working on, you might have to just not do that. You might have to find ways to do extra work the day before or the week leading up to it so that on that day you can focus on being in God's presence, delighting in Him, delighting in your loved ones. Experiment with this. Be gracious to yourself as you try to figure out what a life like this looks like. Because this weekly practice, it isn't just important. This is crucial for our formation. Our formation as God's people. And this practice, it will shape you. for so many positive ways. It will shape you. Because one day we will populate heaven. So we got to be ready for it. We're in October now. How are those New Year's resolutions going? Do we even remember what they were? Setting a goal for the year is hard. It's easy to forget if you set like a goal. I'm going to do this all for the year. And daily goals are nice, but it's not really long enough to be super formative. But a week, 7 days. A week is long enough to be formative, but short enough to where we don't forget what we're trying to accomplish. If you can figure out your week, if you can nail your week and make your week good and life-giving and honoring to God, then you've got life figured out. You don't have to worry about, what am I going to do with my life? How am I going to figure my life out? How am I going to get this all in order? All you have to do is get the week figured out. If you get the week figured out, you got everything else figured out. And I would say, start with Sabbath and structure your life around that. Because if you start with other things, I'm going to build my life this way and do these things and all this, and then you try to squeeze Sabbath in where it can fit it, it's not going to work. It's like that analogy with the jar, and you have sand and pebbles and rock, and it only fits in the jar if you do it in a certain order. It's like that. You have to start with Sabbath. And let me encourage you with this. We were given the explanation for Sabbath, that God created the heavens and the earth on 6 days. And if you know Genesis, you know that humans were made on the 6th day. The 7th day was Sabbath, which means Adam and Eve's first day on the job was a day of rest. They started with the Sabbath. That is God's gift to us. Start with the Sabbath and go from there. If you have a faithful rhythm of work and holy rest, of delighting in God, of receiving restoration from His hand, and offering the same to others as blessing, then the promise Isaiah is true and faithful, that God will make you ride on the heights of the earth, that He will feed you with the heritage of Jacob your father. For the mouth of the Lord has spoken. Heavenly Father, we thank you for this incredible gift of rest. And not just naps or sleeping in, but resting and delighting in your presence. Of being shaped by you in this. And we confess, God, that sometimes we're really bad at resting. Sometimes we're really bad at working. And we ask that you would guide us as we figure out this rhythm that you have established from the beginning, this rhythm that works best. Teach us how to work well and teach us how to rest well. For our own good and for the good of the world around us. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.